Lilly and Jack Sullivan. They vanished. Without a sound, without a trace, no footprints, no backpack, no piece of clothing, not a single confirmed sighting after May 1st. Hundreds searched the woods. Nothing. They brought in drones, dogs, divers. Still nothing. The trail ended before it even began. RCMP stayed quiet. Too quiet. No new updates, no press briefings, no answers. Weeks passed, then months. So what did they actually find? And why does no one seem to be talking about it anymore? The first 48 hours. At around 10 a.m. on May 2, 2025, Malaya Brooks, Murray called 911. Her voice was shaken. She told the dispatcher her two young children, Lilly and Jack, were gone. Just gone. She claimed to have heard them playing earlier that morning around 8:00 a.m., then drifted back to sleep. When she got up again, the house had fallen silent. The kids weren't there. She searched briefly, then made the call. Her partner, Daniel Martel, told responding officers the children might have slipped out through the back patio door. He pointed out that the door was nearly silent when opened, as if to explain how they could have left without being heard. It was an oddly specific detail. Police noted it, but didn't challenge it. CMP officers from Pictou County arrived quickly and initiated what was, at that moment, considered a missing persons case. No Amber Alert was issued. There was no talk of foul play. The children were classified as vulnerable missing, a label used when young kids disappear, but no crime is suspected. The assumption was simple: they wandered off. It happens, sometimes, especially in rural areas. The initial search force was small: a few officers, a drone unit, canine support, and some local volunteers. No helicopters. No coordinated air rescue teams. Just a perimeter around the Gairloch Road property and nearby forested trails. The terrain was rugged, dense woods, steep hills, and remnants of Hurricane Fiona's destruction 2 years earlier. Fallen trees, thick mud, sharp undergrowth. Not an easy place to walk, especially not for a 4- and 6-year-old. But what investigators didn't find became the story. No footprints, no scattered clothes, no broken branches or signs of travel. Not even a toy. The dogs found no scent trail. The drones picked up nothing. There was zero evidence that the children had ever left the property. It was as if they'd vanished into thin air. There was another red flag. When police asked Daniel Martel to describe what the kids were wearing, he gave a specific answer: Jack had on dinosaur rain boots. But later, he admitted he hadn't actually seen Jack that morning. That raised immediate questions. How do you describe what a child was wearing if you didn't see him? Even stranger, no one outside the Hay had seen the kids in days. Despite the lack of any concrete leads, the RCMP continued their ground search through May 3rd. Additional units were brought in. The Nova Scotia Ground Search and Rescue Association began preparing to assist. The search area was expanded slightly but still focused around Gairloch Road. Every path, ditch, and drainage line was checked. Still nothing. By this point, public concern was rising. Local residents started posting online. Some joined search efforts on their own. Tips came into Crime Stoppers, though none were credible. Media attention began to build. But still, no high-ranking RCMP spokesperson stepped forward. The public face of the search was limited to sergeants and field supervisors. For a case involving 2 missing Indigenous children, that silence was deafening. On May 3rd, Malaya spoke to the press for the first, and only, time. She was visibly emotional, holding back tears. "I just want to hold my babies again," she said to CTV News. She shared that Lilly and Jack may have had mild autism, but insisted they were friendly and talkative. That too would later come under scrutiny. Teachers and bus drivers described the children as sociable, even excitable. Not shy, not withdrawn. Behind the scenes, something shifted. While police didn't publicly declare the case suspicious, the RCMP's Major Crime Unit was quietly brought in on May 3rd. That meant homicide detectives, behavioral analysts, and digital forensics teams. Devices were seized. Phones were examined. The family's story, once taken at face value, was now under a different kind of microscope. 48 hours in, and still nothing. No belongings. No sightings. No direction of travel. No proof that the children ever left the house, and no reason to believe they were simply lost in the woods. The forest hadn't given anything back, not even a whisper. Just silence. Cold, endless silence. The search went wrong. Between May 3rd and May 6th, 2025, the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan escalated into one of the largest missing child operations in recent Nova Scotia history. What began as a small-scale search around the family's remote home on Gairloch Road expanded into a full-blown tactical effort involving drones, dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of trained professionals and volunteers. Search zones were widened to include nearby wooded trails, ravines, and swampy lowlands. The area had been damaged by Hurricane Fiona 2 years prior, leaving behind an unpredictable landscape of fallen trees, uneven ground, and dense underbrush. Despite the harsh terrain, searchers combed more than 5.5 square kilometers, grid by grid, looking for any sign the children had passed through. Multiple agencies joined the effort. The RCMP remained in charge, but they were now backed by the Nova Scotia Ground Search and Rescue Association, Colchester Ground Search and Rescue, and Cassara, which provided aerial support. Local volunteers, including members of the Sepeknkatik First Nation, also stepped in. At its peak, more than 160 people were on the ground. Search teams were equipped with heat-sensing drones, GPS tracking systems, and K9 units trained to detect human scent. They were instructed to look for specific signs, pieces of clothing, discarded items, footprints, or Jack's bright green dinosaur boots. Anything could have helped establish a direction of travel or confirm the children had left the property. But nothing appeared. No clothes, no toys, no dropped items, no blood, no broken branches, no clear prints. The only trace that surfaced was a single small footprint found approximately 300 meters from the house. It was never confirmed to belong to either child. No other tracks were found around it, and no trail continued beyond it. Strangely, the RCMP didn't release news of this footprint until later. They also never confirmed whether it was relevant to the case. This omission became a point of frustration for search and rescue experts, who questioned the transparency and strategy behind the investigation. One expert put it bluntly, "Even lost kids don't disappear without leaving a trail. This one never even began." Meanwhile, the RCMP continued to insist the children had likely wandered off. Despite no physical evidence supporting this theory, the classification of the case remained vulnerable missing persons. There was no Amber Alert. According to RCMP protocol, such alerts require signs of abduction or foul play, criteria they said had not been met. But the public wasn't convinced. Social media lit up with criticism. Many questioned how two young children could simply vanish into a forest with no trace, no noise, and no one seeing anything. Comparisons were drawn to other cases, like that of Summer Wells. As the days passed with no progress and no substantial press briefings from law enforcement, the perception grew that RCMP was either overwhelmed or withholding something. Behind the scenes, however, the tone of the investigation was shifting. On May 3rd, the RCMP quietly activated their major crime unit. Investigators began reviewing the family's digital history, phones, internet usage, and GPS data. Behavioral analysts were brought in to review interviews. Though the case was still officially non-criminal, it was clear detectives were now preparing for other possibilities. Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, began showing signs of emotional and physical exhaustion. In interviews between May 4th and 6th, he described riding his ATV across 20-30 acres of land in search of the kids. His emotions fluctuated between frustration, defensiveness, and despair. At one point, he insisted that Lilly and Jack always stayed together, a detail that cast further doubt on the isolated footprint. Curiously, despite growing suspicion from the public, the RCMP didn't investigate, or at least didn't publicly disclose, potential vehicular abduction. No security footage from gas stations or roadways was requested. Dashcam footage wasn't even mentioned until May 28th, almost a full month later. As May 6th came to a close, the case had entered a strange stasis. The ground teams were still searching. but the leads were drying up. No one could say with certainty whether the children had walked into the woods or never left the house at all. Something changed on May 7. After 6 days of one of the most intense ground searches in Nova Scotia's history, the activity around Gairloch Road began to fade. Teams packed up quietly. Dogs were loaded back into trailers. Drones stopped flying. Volunteers were told their help was no longer needed. There was no formal announcement. No press conference. No closure. Just a quiet withdrawal. Many would later call it the quiet stop. There was no explanation. No declaration that the search had ended or moved into a new phase. Agencies like Colchester Ground Search and Rescue and GSRA simply stopped updating their involvement. For those watching from the outside, it was as if the operation had evaporated overnight. Reporters at the scene confirmed that no RCMP briefing was held after May 6. Questions went unanswered. Journalists were either redirected or met with vague statements like, "The investigation is ongoing." On social media, people began calling it a media blackout. With every hour that passed, the silence became more suspicious. Behind that silence, something else was unfolding. The search for physical traces had stopped, but the major crime unit remained active. Without ever declaring it a criminal case, RCMP investigators shifted focus. They began pulling digital data, phone records, GPS history, router logs, browser history. They re-examined the statements of Daniel Martel and Malaya Brooks, Murray. But nothing was shared with the public. No suspects. No persons of interest. No findings. Just silence. The public took notice. Online forums exploded with questions. Did they just give up? Or did they find something they don't want us to know? Some speculated that authorities had found a lead and were choosing not to disclose it. Others suggested darker theories, that something had happened internally, something that needed to be contained. Meanwhile, frustration among the First Nations community grew louder. Malaya's family members from Sapeknekatik First Nation began posting openly, calling for an independent search. Community walks, vigils, and pressure campaigns were launched. Still, there was no official reaction. No plan for a broader sweep. No engagement with neighboring properties. No follow-up interviews. Nothing. There was also no new evidence. No items belonging to Lilly or Jack. No confirmed DNA. Not even the single boot print found in early May was ever verified or mentioned again. The footprint, the only known physical trace, was allowed to fade into irrelevance. And perhaps most critically, there was no Amber Alert. Not even after 6 days with no signs, no clues, and no clear direction. RCMP repeated their position. There is no evidence of abduction. For many, that wasn't good enough. Adding to the confusion was the fact that the search perimeter never expanded beyond Gairloch Road. Despite online suggestions that the children may have been taken by vehicle, there was no record of traffic camera reviews, gas station footage, or dashcam requests. The digital investigation was happening, but none of it reached the public. Even stranger, all media presence near the property was suddenly restricted. Reporters were asked to stay away from the wooded areas they had previously been allowed to film. No new photos were released. No images of the house. No scene documentation. The silence wasn't just passive. It was enforced. There was also the matter of last sighting. Media repeated that known independent sighting of the children was on April 29th by a school bus driver. But no neighbor, teacher, or third party was publicly confirmed to have seen them after May 1st. That detail alone, unconfirmed, unverified, begged the question, had Lilly and Jack ever truly been seen that morning? By May 7th, the official social media accounts of RCMP Nova Scotia and the Pictou district had also gone quiet. No new updates. No calls for assistance. No infographics. No urgency. For a double child disappearance, the silence was deafening. And for many, one haunting question remained: if nothing was found, why stop searching? And if something was found, why weren't we told? The search kept dying. By May 8th, the active search had mostly stopped. The forest, once filled with volunteers, search dogs, and aerial drones, had fallen silent. People who showed up to help that morning found no command post, no coordination, no one in charge. No one officially declared the search over, but everything on the ground suggested it already was. The operation faded, not with a conclusion, but with quiet disappearance. There were no updates from the RCMP, no press conferences, no new statements on social media. RCMP Nova Scotia and the Pictou district went silent. Journalists trying to access the area reported being pushed back. No new images were released. Local news outlets relied on old footage from earlier in the week. The silence was strange, unsettling, and it didn't go unnoticed. No new evidence was found, no clothes, no toys, no signs of struggle, no footprints, not even the faint child-sized print found a few days before was mentioned again. It hadn't led anywhere, and now it was gone from public conversation too. The forest, for all its vastness, had offered nothing. At this point there was still no sign that RCMP had expanded the scope of the investigation. They hadn't canvassed gas stations. They hadn't asked for dashcam footage from passing vehicles. There were no reports of wider search zones beyond Gairloch Road. For many watching closely, it looked like RCMP either believed the children never left the area, or they knew they weren't there anymore. Behind the scenes, the investigation shifted entirely to the Major Crime Unit. Detectives quietly reviewed cell phone records, router logs, GPS data, and re-interviewed the parents. But none of that work was shared with the public. No suspects. No official persons of interest. No forensic breakthroughs. Just silence and speculation. Within the Mi'kmaq community, the silence triggered frustration. Malia's family from the Sepeknkatik First Nation began speaking out online. Vigils were organized. People were no longer waiting for answers, they were demanding them. Some volunteers shared their confusion. They said they'd shown up on May 8, ready to help, only to find no one left in charge. No direction. Nothing. One user called it a ghost scene. The term, disengagement by neglect, began to circulate online, describing how authorities seemed to back away without ever saying they were done. Meanwhile, no senior officials had come forward. No high-ranking RCMP spokesperson. No provincial leader. Not even a recorded video statement. For a case involving two missing Indigenous children, the absence of leadership was painful and noticeable. There was one possible explanation: safety. One search team member anonymously told a local reporter that parts of the forest were too unstable after Hurricane Fiona. He said it wasn't safe to keep pushing people into dangerous terrain without leads. But that explanation never came officially from RCMP, and no alternative plan, like drone sweeps or expanded zones, was offered. The search hadn't been adjusted. It had simply stopped. In similar cases, police usually release maps, behavioral models, or even ask the public to check security footage. Here, none of that happened during May 8 or 9. The system seemed stuck, frozen. Even the basic question of who last saw or heard the children remained unanswered. Aside from Malia claiming she heard them early on May 2, no neighbors, friends, or teachers had been publicly confirmed as witnesses. Data from smart devices, if any existed, wasn't mentioned either. And so, conspiracy theories began to bloom. Reddit threads speculated. Were the kids even in the house that morning? Had something happened earlier that the public never knew about? Some said the search itself may have been a distraction. A smokescreen. One thing was clear. As of May 9, there were more questions than ever, yet fewer answers than before. 2 weeks since Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappeared. The forest had gone quiet. The volunteers were gone. The search teams had pulled back. But on May 18th, something changed. Early that morning, RCMP officers returned to the family's home on Gairloch Road. Not for a wellness check. Not for a routine update. This time, they came with forensic gear. Multiple patrol cars arrived, followed by a van marked for crime scene processing. Yellow tape went up. Access was restricted. Neighbors watched from a distance as officers began sweeping the property. It was the first visible law enforcement activity at the house since the early days of the case. They weren't just walking through the home, they were examining it thoroughly. Officers carried in specialized equipment, 3D scanning cameras, ultraviolet lights, and scent detectors used to find decomposing organic material. The search extended beyond the main building to include the backyard, the shed, and the surrounding tree line. RCMP gave no real explanation. When reporters asked what prompted the sudden return, a spokesperson responded with a single vague line: "We are following up on information that requires additional attention." Nothing more. Online, the silence was deafening. People wanted to know what had changed. Why now? Had they received a new tip? A digital lead? A confession? Or was this something they should have done from the very start? The community noticed something else, too: complete media blackout. Journalists were kept far from the house. No photos were released. No news crews allowed close. The investigation was sealed off, visibly and deliberately. Some began asking, what are they trying to hide? Meanwhile, reports circulated that RCMP were collecting electronic devices, a Wi-Fi router, older phones, computer hard drives, possibly even video from doorbell cameras. The family truck, a gray pickup belonging to Daniel Martel, was also searched thoroughly, inside, outside, and in the back. Still, nothing was confirmed. Despite the renewed activity, no arrests were made. No suspects named. No press conference followed. When RCMP left the scene on May 19th, they gave no statement about what was found, or if anything was found at all. The absence of answers only fueled speculation. Some believed police had discovered something, but were withholding it. Others thought this might have been a pressure tactic or a response to community outrage. And that outrage was real. For the Mi'kmaq community, the return to the home felt like a vindication that maybe they had been right to question the official narrative. Malaya's relatives began speaking out more openly. Calls for an independent investigation grew louder. Still, there were no Amber Alerts, no confirmations, no closure. Whatever RCMP was doing behind closed doors, they weren't sharing it with the public, and the longer the silence dragged on, the more it felt like trust was breaking down, for good. 2 weeks gone, 2 children missing, and a house that now held more questions than ever before. After May 19, 2025, the forest grew still again, but this time, for good. There were no more search teams combing through the woods. No drones. No volunteers. As of June 10, there were no reports of any large-scale ground operations. The RCMP had officially transitioned from active search efforts to a quieter, more focused phase of investigation. The boots on the ground were gone. What remained was a growing silence, and the weight of unanswered questions. On May 28, nearly 4 weeks after the disappearance, the RCMP finally released a formal timeline. It confirmed what many had suspected. The last verified public sighting of Lilly and Jack was in the afternoon of May 1, not May 2 as earlier implied. The police also issued a public call for dashcam footage taken around Gairloch Road from noon to nightfall on May 1. It was the first official attempt to crowdsource visual evidence from the public. For many, the question was obvious: why had it taken this long? Despite these efforts, there were no new leads. As of June 10, investigators had yet to find any physical trace, confirmed sighting, or digital evidence that could clearly indicate where Lilly and Jack had gone. Authorities continued to encourage tips, particularly involving photos, videos, or GPS data from the time and location in question. But the trail was still cold. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the focus of the investigation appeared to shift. By late May, family dynamics began to draw more scrutiny. Malaya Brooks Murray, the mother, left the family's Gairloch Road property with her youngest child, Meadow. She updated her social media relationship status and quietly deleted posts related to the search. These subtle but pointed changes didn't go unnoticed by either investigators or the public. For many observers, it marked a turn in tone, a retreat from the public eye, and perhaps a sign of deeper turmoil within the home. Together, these developments painted a disturbing picture. The searches had stopped, the police had gone quiet, and the family had fractured. Yet, still, no bodies, no answers, no closure. Just silence, shadows, and the question that wouldn't go away: where are Lilly and Jack? And why does it feel like everyone stopped looking? What was missed? From the very beginning, the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan raised more questions than answers. But perhaps even more troubling than the mystery itself was the response that followed. Over time, it became clear there were critical missteps, delays, oversights, and missed opportunities that may have cost investigators the chance to find the children in those vital early hours. The most glaring failure was the decision not to activate an Amber Alert. Both Lilly and Jack were under 10 years old and classified as vulnerable missing persons. Yet the RCMP refused to trigger the emergency alert system. Their explanation was simple: there wasn't specific evidence of an abduction. But experts agree, that's exactly when you need the public's help the most. During those chaotic, confusing first 48 hours, when a broader alert could have changed everything. Throughout the ground search, the geographic scope remained shockingly limited. Search teams never expanded beyond the forested areas near Gerlach Road. No efforts were made to check nearby highways, gas stations, or transit hubs. Places a kidnapper might have used to disappear quickly. It felt as if the RCMP had already decided the children were close by. But with no physical evidence to support that theory, why did they stay locked on that assumption? Adding to public frustration, the RCMP didn't request dashcam or CCTV footage from the public until May 28, nearly 4 weeks after Lilly and Jack vanished. By that point, most relevant video footage would have already been erased or overwritten. In cases like this, timing is everything, and the delay sent a clear message that collecting community evidence hadn't been a top priority. Worse still, public communication was minimal, scattered, and often vague. After May 6, there were no major press briefings, no clear updates, no face of leadership to reassure the community that the case remained a top priority. Instead, residents were left with brief quotes from on-scene officers and a growing sense that something was being hidden. That brings us to another missing piece. No behavioral modeling was ever shared or referenced. In most child disappearance cases, search and rescue teams use established data models, tools that predict how far a child might go, or where they might hide, based on age, neurodiversity, or panic response. This case had none of that. No published search grids, no expert input on how children on the autism spectrum might behave. Just silence. There were also troubling delays in the initial response. The 911 call came in at 10:00 a.m. on May 2. But to this day, the RCMP hasn't confirmed when officers actually arrived or began their search. That absence of a clear timeline created early distrust and made it difficult for anyone to understand what really happened in those crucial first hours. Meanwhile, digital evidence, phones, Wi-Fi routers, GPS records, was seized early in May, yet no analysis was ever released. Not a single update. Not even a confirmation of whether any data was usable. In an age where digital breadcrumbs often lead to answers, the silence was deafening. But perhaps most alarming are the investigative paths that were never explored or fully pursued. There's no record of traffic cameras being checked, no known attempts to trace unusual vehicles. No indication that nearby businesses were canvassed for surveillance footage in the days before the disappearance. And there were no public efforts to identify strangers who may have visited the area between April 28 and May 2. Internally, the family dynamic raised red flags: social media deletions, changing relationship statuses, emotional withdrawal, yet no public profiling or family behavior analysis was ever shared. In missing child cases, family insight can be the key to truth. That door seemed left untouched. The timeline of events, especially on the morning of May 2, was never made clear. We don't know who saw the children last. We don't know when they were last heard. And, without those answers, the chain of events becomes impossible to reconstruct. That's not just frustrating, it's dangerous. There was also no public acknowledgement of potential natural hazards. The area around the home was littered with storm debris from Hurricane Fiona. Could the kids have fallen? Gotten stuck? Been injured by nature, not man? No one knows. Because that theory, too, seems to have gone uninvestigated. Looking back, it wasn't just the lack of evidence that doomed this case. It was the lack of action. The lack of transparency. The lack of urgency. Every day that passed without answers made one question louder than all the rest. Could this have been prevented if someone had just looked sooner, wider, or harder? The disappointment. From the moment Lilly and Jack Sullivan disappeared, the public expected an aggressive, transparent, and well-coordinated search and investigation effort from law enforcement. What they witnessed instead was a cascade of delays, opacity, and decisions that many have called premature, dismissive, or simply negligent. Below is a comprehensive summary of the most serious criticisms leveled at the RCMP throughout the case. One of the most immediate and controversial decisions was RCMP's announcement on May 7, 2025, to scale down and ultimately halt the active ground search. This decision came just 5 days after the children were reported missing, with no confirmed physical evidence, sightings, or known leads. The move shocked and infuriated not only the Sullivan family, but also the broader public. Daniel Martel, the children's stepfather, publicly condemned the halt, insisting the children could still be nearby. Michelle Glasgow, a respected figure from the Sapeknekatik First Nation, echoed his concerns, warning that the search had been called off too soon and suggesting that it reinforced long-standing systemic disregard for Indigenous families. Online, thousands echoed a haunting phrase: "Children don't just disappear. Not like this." Despite the vulnerability and young age of the victims, RCMP chose not to issue an Amber Alert, citing the lack of evidence pointing to abduction. While technically within their procedural bounds, the choice appeared grossly out of step with public expectation. Critics labeled it an overly rigid, bureaucratic interpretation of policy. Many experts and family advocates argued that the Amber Alert system exists precisely for moments like this, where time is of the essence and full situational clarity is absent. The decision reinforced allegations of systemic bias, particularly against Indigenous families. Michelle Glasgow went further, suggesting that had the children not been part of a First Nations community, the response might have looked very different. One of the most consistent frustrations voiced by the public and media was RCMP's opacity. There were long stretches with no updates, no press conferences, and no clarification about the status of the investigation. Criminologist Dr. Michael Arnfield from Western University criticized RCMP's strategy, saying, "They're keeping too much in the dark. This isn't how you encourage public cooperation." Without regular updates, online speculation filled the void, often descending into chaotic theorizing. Was someone in the family a suspect? Did RCMP have evidence they weren't sharing? These questions proliferated, and RCMP's silence only fueled them. On May 7th, during a long-awaited press briefing, Sergeant Carly McCann opened with acknowledgments about unceded Indigenous territory and historical African Nova Scotian contributions. While culturally aware in other contexts, many found the timing baffling. National Post columnist Terry Newman labeled it a tone-deaf PR stunt that detracted from the urgency of 2 missing children. Instead of focusing the message entirely on the urgency of the case and the practical next steps, the RCMP appeared to some as shifting into damage control mode or virtue signaling. The backlash was immediate and widespread. Another point of contention was the geographic limitation of the search. Despite early calls from Daniel Martel and others to expand the operation beyond the immediate forested area near Gairloch Road, RCMP stuck rigidly to a local perimeter. There were no reports of coordinated outreach to regional transportation hubs, such as bus stations, airports, or border crossings. No alerts were sent to neighboring provinces. As days passed without discovery, the failure to broaden the scope began to appear less like caution and more like a strategic blunder. Throughout the ordeal, family members, including Daniel Martel, made numerous public requests to broaden outreach, acquire better technology, and increase visibility for the case. Those calls were, in large part, ignored. The family also requested that RCMP engage with independent media and third-party investigators to amplify the story. These efforts were met with silence or vague deflections. The appearance of a dismissive attitude only widened the rift between investigators and the affected community. By the second week of May, RCMP communications had slowed to a crawl. Press briefings became rare. Many accounts remained dormant. For the public, the message was clear: law enforcement was losing interest. Rumors soon began to circulate that RCMP was quietly trying to wrap up the case, to avoid further embarrassment. Whether true or not, the agency's minimal visibility lent credibility to those suspicions. RCMP also faced criticism for failing to validate a potential clue found early in the search. A small footprint, discovered roughly 300 meters from the house in early May, was never publicly confirmed as belonging to either child. There was no follow-up of whether the print was analyzed for size, depth, or potential match. Nor was there any behavioral interpretation provided, such as whether the location or direction of the print indicated wandering, fear, or abduction. In the absence of explanation, this singular trace of the children's presence vanished from official communication. Law enforcement also missed opportunities to apply behavioral modeling techniques. In missing children cases, it's common to employ lost person behavior models to predict movement patterns based on age, cognitive profile, and environment. Despite the mother's statement that Lily and Jack might be on the autism spectrum, there was no evidence the RCMP ever consulted experts in child psychology or utilized specialized search algorithms. This omission potential to misdirected search efforts or missed clues. Another widely discussed issue was the delay in requesting public assistance with dashcam footage or home security videos. In similar cases across North America, police agencies routinely ask for such footage within 24 to 72 hours. In this case, RCMP waited until May 28, nearly 4 weeks after the disappearance, to make such a request. By that point, much of the footage was likely overwritten or lost. As a result, potentially crucial leads were erased by time and inertia. Internally, questions were also raised about RCMP's data analysis capabilities. Though police reportedly seized phones, routers, and digital records from the family home early on, there were no updates about the findings. No timeline of text messages, no GPS data, no usage logs were released. This created the impression that either RCMP found something incriminating and withheld it, or worse, that they lacked the resources or expertise to interpret the data. RCMP was also faulted for not investigating external possibilities thoroughly enough. There was no indication that law enforcement analyzed nearby highway or commercial CCTV cameras to track suspicious vehicles. Delivery drivers, postal workers, or visitors to the area were never publicly identified or interviewed. Critics pointed out that a well-organized abduction could have taken place in mere minutes, and without investigating those who had access to the area in the preceding days, police missed a critical angle. Finally, the psychological and social dynamics within the home remained underexplored. As tensions within the family became visible, with changes to social media, deleted posts, and changes in living arrangements, RCMP made no public indication that behavioral analysts were involved. In high-risk missing child cases, family stressors and inconsistencies are often key indicators. Ignoring this dimension left a gaping hole in the investigation. In summary, the investigation into Lilly and Jack Sullivan's disappearance has been widely criticized as mishandled. From prematurely ending search efforts and failing to issue an Amber Alert, to opaque communication and limited geographic scope, RCMP's actions have prompted outrage and heartbreak. When a system built to protect its most vulnerable falters this badly, the damage extends beyond the case itself. It undermines trust, deepens historical wounds, and leaves families like the Sullivans with more questions than answers. Until those questions are faced directly and transparently, no closure can be offered, and no justice can truly be done. The found footage of the children. As the ground search ended and the silence deepened, it wasn't witnesses or confessions that offered clues, but technology. Data, drones, satellite scans. Yet even then, what was found didn't bring clarity, it only made the mystery sharper. These are the traces investigators have clung to. And the real question is that are they signs of truth? Or just more noise? In what seemed like a breakthrough, the RCMP confirmed that surveillance footage had captured images believed to show Lilly and Jack Sullivan. But from the very beginning, the announcement was vague, almost too vague to bring any real comfort. Authorities declined to share where the footage was taken. Was it near their home on Gairloch Road? Was it miles away? More critically, they didn't say when it was recorded. Was it before the children went missing? Or after the disappearance was reported on May 2nd? The police also said nothing about the children's condition in the footage. Were they alone, afraid, being led by someone? That lack of detail raised serious concerns. Without a specific timestamp or location, it was impossible for the public, or even the press, to determine the context of the video. Some questioned whether the footage showed Lilly and Jack at all, or just two kids who resembled them from a distance. And while the RCMP confirmed they were analyzing it, no frame, still, or even a basic description was shared. Adding to the uncertainty, the origin of the footage wasn't disclosed. Who submitted it? Was it from a residential security camera, a retail store, a highway dash cam? And were the children alone, or accompanied by an adult? There were no answers. No length of the video. No frame analysis. No cross-checking with known sightings. Just a vague promise that authorities were looking into it. Worse still, there was no indication that the video was ever compared against witness statements. If Daniel Martel had claimed he last saw the kids inside the house early on May 2nd, and this footage was from that same day, why wasn't that timeline addressed? Did the kids appear to be walking freely? Were they dressed the same as described? And if it was taken prior to May 1st, what value did it really hold? It would only confirm their existence, not their fate. To this day, no third party, not even store clerks, witnesses, or civilians, has stepped forward to validate the sighting. That absence matters. Without corroboration, the footage remains in a gray zone between hope and speculation. The RCMP has not stated if facial recognition technology or AI analysis was used to confirm the children's identities. This is especially significant, considering AI had previously been employed in this case to analyze satellite imagery and surface anomalies. What's even more frustrating is that the video has not been linked to any other existing clues. It doesn't appear to capture the suspicious gray SUV seen passing the house multiple times, nor does it include the wide-brimmed hat woman flagged by satellite image analysis. It's unclear if the setting matches any area near the rectangular patch of disturbed soil previously identified by AI. Without those connections, the footage feels like an isolated anomaly, a detail without a thread. The RCMP's lack of transparency in presenting the footage only intensified public skepticism. Was this an attempt to calm a restless community? To create the illusion of progress in a case growing colder by the day? On social media, the reaction was sharp. Many accused the police of feeding false hope. Others saw it as a possible red herring, a way to stall while more critical investigations were underway. The phrase, hope or distraction, became more than a headline, it became a dividing line between belief and doubt. The police themselves may have inadvertently confirmed how limited the footage was when they issued a follow-up plea, asking the public to submit more dashcam footage, surveillance clips, or drone video from April 28 to May 2nd. If the original footage was decisive, why would they need more? This strongly suggests that the video in question was incomplete, lacking the context or clarity needed to move the case forward. It might show movement, but not a destination. Faces, but not fate. And so, what could have been a breakthrough now lingers as another question mark. A blurry video, unverified subjects, an ambiguous timeline. It could become the thread that unravels the truth, or just another mirage in a case already thick with dead ends. The suspicious presence from AI. In the weeks leading up to Lilly and Jack Sullivan's disappearance, a gray SUV triggered multiple alerts during an AI-enhanced satellite sweep. It wasn't just one sighting. The vehicle was detected on 4 separate early mornings, always moving past the Sullivan residence. Each time, it stopped at the same nearby intersection, odd behavior for a quiet rural area with virtually no regular traffic. Investigators flagged this as a behavioral red flag, a pattern that suggested intentional surveillance or repeated reconnaissance. What raised more suspicion was the SUV's presence in not just one, but 2 key locations. Besides passing by the Sullivan home, it was also detected near a vacant commercial property, roughly 800 meters away, a location that had already been flagged by investigators due to a mysterious rectangular patch of disturbed ground captured in satellite imagery. The SUV didn't match any vehicles registered to Daniel Martel, Malaya Brooks, Murray, or even anyone else living in the area. But the trail stopped cold. RCMP never publicly confirmed whether they had identified the vehicle, run its plates, or even attempted to trace it through local traffic cameras or road registry databases. No one from the neighborhood came word saying they'd seen it. No one could describe the driver. It was as if this vehicle ghosted in and out of the investigation, leaving behind a digital trace but no human eyewitness. Its lack of a visible connection to the scene or to the family only added to the mystery. At the same time, AI picked up another anomaly: a woman in a wide-brimmed hat. She appeared in 2 satellite images, roughly 1.2 kilometers apart, over a 5-day span. The times and locations of her appearances were strange, unpopulated zones. No clear reason to be there, and at similar hours each day. There were no trails, no shops, no homes. Just her, out of place and out of context. Her attire and movements didn't match any known residents, nor did her presence align with any public activities or events. Still, no facial image, no identification, and no physical camera footage ever surfaced. The RCMP hasn't released her name or even labeled her a suspect, and not a single person from the community has recognized or acknowledged seeing someone who fits her description. Critically, there's no established link between her and the SUV. No footage, no timestamp overlay, and no GPS data connecting her to the vehicle, the house, or the kids. Her repeated presence remains unexplained, but just unexplained enough to keep her under review. These 2 anomalies, a vehicle that doesn't belong, and a person who doesn't fit, represent some of the strongest digital traces the investigation has. Yet their value is being limited by a stunning lack of follow-up verification. There's no confirmation that police used facial recognition or gait analysis to confirm the woman's identity. No enhanced imaging. No indication that RCMP even overlaid her movements on a map with the SUV's activity, or with the family's timeline. It's unclear whether GPS data or signal tracing were used to track her, or if these sightings were merely isolated events interpreted by the AI system. And the community is noticing. People are asking, why haven't we heard more? Why aren't we seeing composite sketches, surveillance stills, or vehicle alerts? Why hasn't anyone been ruled out or in? The unfortunate reality is that without further confirmation, these leads remain just shadows. They raise the possibility of a third-party abduction, of premeditated planning, of someone watching. But in the absence of hard data or clear links, they're still just puzzle pieces floating outside the frame, whether the SUV and the unknown woman are central to the case or simply red herrings. One thing is clear: they deserved more attention than they got. If someone out there recognizes the vehicle, or the woman, it could be the break this case desperately needs. Until then, they remain silent threads in a case already woven with silence. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence in this entire investigation wasn't found by people on the ground. It came from the sky. When RCMP shifted their focus from physical search to digital investigation, they partnered with satellite imaging companies Maxar Technologies and Planet Labs. With the help of AI, a strange patch of Earth was flagged, an oddly clean, rectangular section of disturbed dirt, roughly 2 meters in length. It appeared sometime after May 1st and vanished within days. It wasn't near any trail, road, or home. And it didn't look like farmland. It looked planned. The shape and timing of this patch raised immediate suspicions. This wasn't just a random bit of disturbed soil. It was precise. It was isolated. And it came and went just as the world started looking for Lilly and Jack. Analysts say it didn't line up with normal terrain changes. It didn't look natural. AI software tracked shadows cast across the plot over time. Those shadows changed, like something had been dug up, then filled in. And after May 5th, all activity in that area stopped. Nothing else touched it again. RCMP never released the exact coordinates. But investigators estimate that it was within 400 to 600 meters of the Sullivan home, close enough for someone to reach by foot, under cover of night, without drawing attention. That's a key detail. Someone could have walked out, done something, and walked back without anyone noticing. If that spot held evidence, anything from clothing to a body, it could explain how two children disappeared without a trace. Here's the problem. We still don't know if the police ever physically checked it. No confirmation of digging. No mention of radar scans. No forensic reports. In any other case, a patch like this would get a full excavation. But in this case, just silence. If they did investigate, they're not saying. And that's fueling more doubt than confidence. This lack of transparency has hit a nerve with the public. Online forums, Reddit threads, and true crime communities are all asking the same thing. Why hasn't RCMP confirmed what they did, or didn't do, at that site? Why leave such an obvious lead in the dark? Several theories have formed around this one plot of land. Some believe it was a temporary burial site. Dug fast, used quickly, then concealed before search teams ever got close. Others say it was a dump spot, a place to stash something for a day or two before moving it permanently. There's even a theory that it was part of a larger plan, something premeditated. You don't dig a perfect rectangle deep in the woods for no reason. That kind of work takes time and purpose. But there's a quieter, more unsettling theory. Maybe it was dismissed. Maybe authorities saw it, shrugged it off, and walked away. If that happened, if this was the one solid clue, and it got ignored, that could be a devastating failure. What complicates things further are the connections to other suspicious elements. Around the same time that the patch appeared, AI also detected a gray SUV, repeatedly circling the Sullivan home and stopping at the same intersection. It was never identified. Not registered locally. Not claimed by anyone in the case. Could it be connected? And what about the unknown woman in the wide-brimmed hat, spotted twice in strange areas, at strange times? Could she be tied to this spot? No one knows. Or if someone does, they're not saying. Some believe RCMP is holding back on purpose, maybe to protect an active investigation. Maybe they're monitoring the site to see if someone returns. That's not unusual in cases like this. But when the public is desperate for answers, silence looks a lot like incompetence. Or worse, a cover-up. The rectangular patch of dirt is still one of the strongest pieces of physical evidence in this case. It's the only thing the ground has given us. No shoes, no backpacks, no toys, no footprints. Just dirt, moved, then covered up. In a case full of empty rooms and missing data, this one piece of land might hold more truth than anything else. Or it might be just another mystery with no end. But if it means anything, if it ever means anything, someone needs to speak up. Because in a case of this cold, every inch of disturbed earth deserves a second look. Weighted clues. In the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, the problem isn't just a lack of clues. It's the overwhelming number of unconnected ones. Each major lead appears to point in a different direction. The surveillance footage doesn't link to the gray SUV. The SUV isn't seen near the rectangular patch of disturbed soil. The unidentified woman in the wide-brimmed hat doesn't appear with either the vehicle or the children. Instead of building a unified timeline, each clue spins off into its own narrative. The investigation, rather than narrowing down, has splintered into competing theories. This fragmentation has serious consequences. Investigators are forced to follow parallel paths that may never meet. Without coordination, these fragmented leads can confuse the investigation, drain resources, and prolong the agony of not knowing what really happened to the children. Another major issue is the lack of contextual details for each clue. The surveillance footage has no verified timestamp or confirmed location. The SUV's license plate was never identified. The woman spotted by AI hasn't been recognized by anyone in the area. And the disturbed earth hasn't been confirmed as ever being properly excavated or tested. These missing pieces turn potential breakthroughs into speculation. Even valid clues, without grounding, risk being dismissed or misinterpreted. There's also growing concern that some of these leads may be inaccurate, or worse, manipulated. With so much reliance on satellite imagery and AI analysis, the possibility of false positives can't be ignored. AI might interpret shadows or ground patterns as meaningful, when they're not. Surveillance clips can be altered, taken out of context, or selectively shared to shape public perception. In the worst-case scenario, some of these leads might be intentionally misleading, meant to distract or delay justice. Naturally, the public is reacting to this uncertainty. Online communities have filled in the blanks with speculation. Some believe the SUV is part of a trafficking network. Others think the rectangular dirt patch was a temporary burial site. Some suspect the woman in the hat was involved in a religious cult or a custody plot. And questions continue to swirl around the authenticity of the surveillance footage itself. Is it recent? Is it even real? These theories, while understandable, are pulling public attention away from confirmed facts and muddying the waters further. Despite the importance of each clue, no effort appears to have been made to connect them forensically. Investigators haven't mapped out whether the SUV or the woman were ever near the dirt site. No gait or facial recognition was used to confirm if the children were in the footage. There's been no soil sampling from the disturbed patch. Without sensing timelines and locations, all these pieces remain isolated, offering more confusion than clarity. Worse still, these unconfirmed leads create an emotional roller coaster. News of a new video brings hope, but with no clear date or context, that hope might be baseless. The same goes for the SUV and the mysterious patch of earth. Families, friends, and even the public are being tossed between optimism and despair. This kind of psychological strain can lead to false confessions, misdirected accusations, or dangerous assumptions made in desperation. At the heart of this mess is a chilling truth without solid evidence. Even weak or unrelated leads start to look like breakthroughs. They create noise, loud, chaotic noise, that can drown out the one signal that might actually solve the case. If someone responsible for the disappearance is watching all this unfold, they may feel safer than ever, hiding behind the confusion. The next steps are critical. Authorities need to immediately cross-reference all digital data with real-world activity. Release the surveillance footage with verified timestamps. Fully excavate and test the disturbed soil. Use high-resolution photos of the children to confirm or rule out the surveillance IDs. Track unregistered vehicles in the region from April to May. Re-interview everyone involved under the assumption that some of these leads might finally intersect. And there's one last question that's becoming harder to ignore. Is this confusion accidental? Or is someone creating it on purpose? Whether it's a manipulative party involved in the case, or simply the mishandling of high-tech evidence, the result is the same: chaos. And in chaos, the truth becomes harder to see. Until that truth surfaces, this case remains not just unsolved, but dangerously scattered. The disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan teaches us one of the hardest truths about criminal investigations. When there's no balance, everything can fall apart. If you focus too hard on one theory, you risk ignoring the truth staring you in the face. But if you chase every possible lead without direction, you end up with chaos. Somewhere between those two extremes lies the truth. But in this case, that middle ground was never found. It's easy to blame law enforcement. But we also need to recognize the pressure they were under, from the public, from the clock, from the silence of too few clues. They had to make choices: which leads to follow, which ones to leave behind. Maybe they backed the wrong horse. Maybe they were afraid to chase them all. Whatever the reason, the cost is undeniable. This case is a reminder that early missteps in an investigation can carry serious consequences. That relying too heavily on tech without grounding it in human logic can generate more noise than answers. That being, sure, if something isn't enough, you have to weigh what's possible and what can't be ruled out. And despite everything, we still hold on to one thing: hope. Hope that Lilly and Jack are still out there. Hope that someone, somewhere, saw something that matters. Hope that we haven't missed our only chance. And above all, hope that next time, whether it's for them or for another child, we'll get it right. Because sometimes, all that's left is a prayer whispered into silence, and the belief that the truth, no matter how buried, still wants to be found.